gosh, yes, I think we're all so excited about this. Let's be real, CMAs are a topic that all of us, quite frankly, avoid. They can be intimidating. I have been in the business for about 5 or 6 years now. I entered the business as a buyer's agent. So transparently, doing a long form CMA was not something that I learned until about 2 years ago. And it was quite intimidating to me at the time. Now I think it's a little bit fun because the numbers can actually make a lot of sense and they help us tell the story that we are trying to have with our sellers. That said, I think it's always nice to see how other people do their version of it. So I'm going to go ahead and jump on in. I will say this class is a little bit tricky to teach virtually just because I do jump around to a number of screens. So by all means, if you guys are looking at all of this, just let me know if you have any questions or if I'm moving too fast. I will say kind of just follow along with me on what we're doing today. And then my advice would be if you have a listing that you need to work on, then just kind of pull this up and work side by side, refer back to it when you have time. And then just know I'm always passionate about helping our agents with this stuff. So if you ever want to schedule a Zoom call or something of that sort, I'm happy to kind of walk you through your first one as we get started if needed. So give me just a moment. I'm going to share my screen with you guys. As we do this though, I want to do kind of a quick show of hands so I can get a feel for the room. Who here has done a long form CMA before? And if you have your camera off, just drop it in the chat or give me like a little thumbs up. Bryn, have you done one?
No, I think I've only done like the short, like I'll do the little CMA summaries. I just tried, I think, to do one, but I don't think I did it correctly. So.
Totally. I have lived by my like short CMAs and then just used like photos to help tell my story basically. I mean, really and truly, like even being in the business and transitioning out of being a buyer's agent, I will say it, I have done 2 listing presentations and taking those listings without doing long form CMAs. Thankfully, the market was in a place where it was seller heavy enough or like such a seller's market that as long as we were close, we were good to go. But obviously, and it seems like our market is kind of trending back that way here soon now anyways, but obviously we want to be educated about what we're doing. So awesome. Good to know because that's kind of the same path I was on. Anyone else want to share? Jenny or Lena? Have either of you done?
Kate, I did the RPR. I did like a little training with them and I did it, but I'm like, I don't really know how great I did it. It really helped me to sharpen a little bit my skill to understand like how they pull it and what they do. But, today's is great because it's like, it's not going to hurt any because it's one of those subjects that I think anybody would agree that it's nice to get better at it.
I agree. And that's a great point. Thank you for saying that. There are a ton of resources out there for us where quite literally you can put in the addresses of the comparable homes that we're referencing and it will make some adjustments for you, or you can go in and make some slight adjustments and it will populate some massive packet for you. So just know that there's resources available. We brought in MLS at one point and they did a training with us on how to 3 different versions or ways to do those types of things and different platforms you can create those types of packets on. So great note. When I send out this recording, I'll also include that link just in case anyone wants to circle back to it. This version though, in essence, is just going to be kind of I think Brian and I mentioned, it's like your mad scientist approach, right? Like this is the sheet of paper that we can pull out and just really show our sellers where all of our homework is and how we are truly arriving at this number. And the amount of time that we spend evaluating it is really up to the situation. But we always want to have this kind of in our back pocket. So real quick, I'm going to go through some slides and then I'm going to do, it says it has stopped sharing. I guess you guys can't see that now.
No.
Weird. No, I popped off. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to start here and then we'll do our own example. But really quickly, what is a CMA? Anyone want to just kind of throw it out there for me?
Comparative market analysis.
Yes.
Exactly. Yes. And the purpose of it is, a number of things. One, mainly primarily though, we have a point of reference for our sellers to provide an idea of how we are giving advice on pricing a given home, right? I want to take a step back here and remind myself and everyone else here that it is not our job to tell the sellers how they should price their home. It is our job to provide advice based on the market statistics and use that as guidance into how we might make a plan to price their home and give them ideas.
Can I just jump in and say one thing? Because forgive me, it's probably something you'll talk about anyway, but just because Lena mentioned the RPR thing. So just remember, like that is RPR in essence and the CMA wizard in Paragon or Cloud CMA or whatever CMA platform you use, like that's really a presentation tool. They do have like automated valuation models built into them, things like that. What we're going to go over is like the mechanics of actually doing, adjustments and price evaluations versus the presentation piece of it. So while I used to just go into a seller and show this spreadsheet that Kate will go into, Kate makes it look much more presentable with her own templates, and then going into like RPR or whatever is how you make a presentation of all this. But actually coming up with a price is what we're talking about when we say a long form CMA, not letting a computer model dictate that. So this isn't about presentation, like, the aesthetics of it so much. It's about coming up with an actual range, just like an appraiser does.
Exactly. Yes. And so basically we are here to create a path for having this conversation. Obviously, having this does not change the outcome of an appraisal. It does not, this is not in an appraisal, right? Like all important things to know. It is strictly a guidance for what our plan is in marketing a given home, but it's incredibly important for a number of reasons. One, we want to be educated about what we're speaking about, and we need this for our file for commission. Obviously, you can have a short version of a CMA in there, but really and truly, we should be doing long form ones as much as we can, especially if we have time. So when we are making a CMA, kind of the very short and consolidated version of it is we first want to evaluate the subject property. And when we're doing this, I like to go through the same way that we have it listed on the spreadsheet that I'm going to show you in just a moment. But I like to start by looking at the interior and exterior. By this, I mean, I am looking at the finished level, any upgrades or improvements that they've done, any notes to given conditions of things. So really breaking it down on a granular level. When you walk in, what is the flooring on the first floor? What's the condition of it? What are the cabinets in the kitchen? Are they wood? Are they painted? Do you have granite countertops or laminate or solid surface? Are they flat cabinet tops, or are they staggered? Is there a screen porch? Is there a deck on the outside? What does the property back up to? Is it a flat lot? Is it fully fenced? Do you have a pool? Literally just a list of all of the features. If we were to kind of break it down into one little thing. When I'm making a description of a listing, for example, when I go to put it in MLS, this is just kind of my workflow as a background, but when I'm preparing to write a description for a property, very often I'll go through that list in my head of what are these features and finishes that I'd want to include in that description. These are the same type of things. Now, granted, having worn down carpet is not something I'm going to put in that description, right? But these are the types of things that we want to make note of. I also want to make sure we point out that a large part of this is also evaluating the age of given systems. So is this a relatively new home? Was it built in the past few years? And we know that the systems are relatively new. Or is this a home that was built in 1960 and maybe the HVAC has been replaced a few times, might be towards the end of its life now? Or it could be a brand new roof, whatever the case may be, making note of those items. We then want to do the same thing with all of the comps that we find. And so when we're talking about comparable homes here, really we want to find around 3 to 5 properties that are similar in size, age, condition, style, and location. Like properties to like properties. If we can stay within the neighborhood, that is ideal. Our dream scenario is to find the same house with the same floor plan in the same neighborhood. That's the dream, especially that's relatively recently sold. But if we can't do that, then we want to be finding something as similar as possible, either within the neighborhood or slightly outside of it, comparing a ranch style home to a ranch style, 2-story to 2-story, townhome to townhome. You get the point. So what we're going to do is we're going to go and do exactly that. We're going to look at our subject, and then we're going to work on finding some comparable homes. Then we are going to make a spreadsheet, and out of all of the comparable homes, we are going to make adjustments to the comps only, not to the subject, to the comps only. And we're going to make these adjustments so that if we were to make these adjustments, that's what it would take to make the comparable home equal to the subject, right? So if my subject property has laminate, the LVP flooring throughout the entire first floor, and the comparable is mainly laminate, but it also has carpet, then I would need to add LVP throughout the entire first floor of that comparable property to make it equal to the subject. And so the thing that we want to keep in mind here is this little mantra, and transparently, I apologize. I might say this a number of times today, just because it really, I have to say it repeatedly, even though I have experience so that I don't mess it up. But superior, if the comp is superior, then we subtract. If it is inferior, then we add. This might sound totally out in the wild currently until we kind of go into examples, but just keep that in mind. I'll continue to refer back to that. We're going to make adjustments to the comps, never to the subject. Okay, so now let's go ahead and go on in and give a quick example. So I'm going to start off real quick with a property that I am very familiar with. This is something that I sold to a client a little while ago, a few years ago. It is now an Airbnb. I work very closely with this client. I've sold him a number of homes, so I'm very familiar with the condition of the property. You won't always necessarily have as much insight. And that is okay. Sorry, I think I'm echoing a little bit. Let me just make sure everyone's muted. If you don't have insight into the subject property, this is what I would recommend. Reach out to the sellers, ideally before your listing presentation, and say, hey guys, obviously your biggest question is going to be related to price. I'm never in the habit of really talking about things that I haven't seen for myself. So before I have a chance to get over there and see the property for itself, would you mind sending me a few photos of each room so that I can get an idea of what your layout is and what your finishes are? So I make sure that the comparable homes that I pull to give us a reference for this price really makes sense for your property. And so just have your clients do that and tell them, no need to clean up, no need to prepare. Just go ahead and text this to me. So the property that I'm going to be looking at today is 6818 Resting Grove Road. This is in Southeast Raleigh. So ideally, also, we will have a previous MLS to refer to. You might not necessarily have that. If you don't, you can also reference the tax records slightly. It's not going to help too much. You definitely would need those photos additionally. But ideally, we have a past MLS sheet to reference. And so when we're doing this, I would normally start by going through the photos and then breaking down any information that I need to. I will say that this home was purchased as new construction from the builder. And so the photos that we see here are just representative. It is not the actual property. So I'm actually going to go over to the Airbnb sheet for this property. But basically what I'm going to do is, as I'm going through this, I'm going to make a list. Let's see if I have it. I'm going to make a list, something of this sort, where I'm making note of things like the square footage, the size of the home in terms of beds and bathrooms, when was it built, and then all of those details that we just talked about. Ideally, if you have it, I like to start by looking at the floor plan and just get a lay of the land. Look at it as if you are looking at new construction. This is how I take this perspective. As we're going through this, I like to think of it in terms of new construction, in terms of finish level, not necessarily in terms of the price itself, but just referencing the fact that if I were to walk into a design appointment with the builder, there's different levels to finishes. And so as we're going through this, not only am I going to note whatever the given item is, but I'm also going to note the finish level accompanying it. So when you walk in, you've got kind of a nice long hallway with a half bath on the left, kind of an open concept layout. You've got kitchen right here, kind of an eat-in dining area, living room, a covered patio, 2-car garage. Then you're going to go upstairs. And from there, you've got a loft, a laundry room off of the loft. You have a large owner suite with a large walk-in closet, a bathroom with a double vanity. It has a walk-in shower and garden tub separate. This is a true laundry room. Also, it's something you can physically walk into. It's not in the hall. You've got 2 additional bedrooms and a bathroom in between those. Okay, then I'm going to go through those photos, and I'm likely going to start on the outside. When I'm doing this, again, keeping in mind, if I were to walk into a builder, first level in terms of finishes is always going to be if the entire house is vinyl. In this case, it's not. So we're one small step above. Kind of your next step above that is going to be some stone or brick accent, either around the base of the home or around the garage like we see here. If this was another level up, then maybe this entire area would be stone, or maybe it has more stone accent. And then kind of your final level would be full stone on the front, full brick on the front, or even further, a full brick home. So I'm making note of things like that. We've got a small covered front porch, not much, but you might could fit one chair there. Like we said, it's got stone around it. It has a fully fenced backyard. It's hard to tell from these photos, but it actually slopes up dramatically. You can tell he's put in some raised beds. There's a little detached deck over here. You can't see too much. There's that covered patio that we talked about. He does not have it screened. All right, now we're going to work our way on the inside. So bear with me, scrolling around a little bit. When you walk in, you will come down this hallway. This is the living area. So we've got LVP flooring throughout the entire first floor. There's no fireplace. We've got dark wood cabinets, granite countertops, stainless steel appliances. We have a subway tile backsplash. Again, I'm kind of making note as I go through this. Subway tile is a pretty nice one. It's not the top of the line, but it's nice, especially compared to like a peel and stick. Definitely dramatic differences between those. All right. Then if we were to head on upstairs, let me see if I can find a picture of the loft real quick. Well, I guess I'll come back to that. All right. Owner's bedroom. Large. It's got kind of its own sitting area, if you will. That's a king bed, so we can tell how big that space is. Like we talked about, it's got the separate shower and walk-in shower and garden tub. Kind of a standard finish for a guest bathroom. And then kind of standard bedrooms for the other two. Nothing wild, they're not massive, but they're a good layout. The paint condition looks pretty good. Carpet looks pretty good. Nothing really too much to note there. Oh, here's the loft. A little nook. Okay, we get the point. Now, I will say, this is a relatively newer home. So this is going to be kind of our easiest situation to work with, but using this information is how you're going to do all of the others. Then what we're going to do is take all of that information, combine it with the information that we've pulled from MLS regarding the square footage and the age that, or the time that it was built. Because we know the age of it, because we know that it was built in 2020, we know that the roof and HVAC, water heater, all of that, 3 years old. We're then going to take all of that and put it into our CMA spreadsheet. Now, this is what it looks like. If you've never seen one of these, fret not. We have free resources available to you. If you're not yet familiar with them, you can go on our backend website here at Choice and just log in. You go to Office and then Documents and type in CMA. We have that available for you. We also have a full guide available for you to reference. And I'm going to circle back to that in just a moment. But I'll start putting this information in the field that says, surprise, surprise, subject. Now, I like to go in and make an adjustment to this and add all of those things that I just talked about. On the standard sheet we provide, we have kind of a miscellaneous interior and miscellaneous exterior section. In my opinion, it is easiest if when you are doing this, you make every single finish kind of its own line item, because then it's easier to compare everything at the end, but use whatever works for you. Yes, Brian.
So because I love everything you do, I've actually made some adjustments to the template we have on the intranet.
Okay.
So it should, the one we have on the internet now should look a little bit more like yours, maybe not quite as awesome, but a little bit more like yours in terms of some additional fields. So thank you.
Yeah, for sure. But you know, you can always just add a line above or below, do whatever works for you. So as please.
I'm sorry for interrupting. Would you mind sharing yours though? Because I know you always go extra, so it'd be nice to have the,
Absolutely.
yeah. I mean, I know we have the template, but for those of us that are newer, it'd be really nice to have this
behind it all. Yeah, absolutely. For sure. So when I'm doing any other questions real quick? All right, let me know if you guys do. Feel free to chime on in. So I've added all of that information we talked about. It's a detached home. It's in the Summerlin neighborhood. I'm going to circle back to that in just a second. It's located, I normally put the location as the zip code. I don't think that matters too much, but it can matter if we are looking in specific areas. Something like if our subject property is off of Lake Boone Trail and we're pulling a lot of things that are inside the Beltline, but this one property is outside the Beltline, for example, we might just make a note of things like that. I'm then going to note the exterior construction. You see what I did here. It's mainly vinyl. It does have that stone around the garage. So in my opinion, that's kind of a moderate amount of stone. I've added the number of bedrooms. I've also added the bathrooms. I want to take a second to pause here. When we're talking about bathrooms, we want to do the number of full baths as whatever it is, but then we want to do the number of half baths as point whatever number of bathrooms there are. So normally we'd say if it's 2.5 bath, it's 2.5 bathrooms in a normal situation. On our CMA though, we want to put 2.1, or if there's 2 half baths and 2 full baths, we'd put 2.2. And the reason we do this is because, you know, 2 half baths don't equal a whole, especially if we're talking in terms of value and functionality. So it's just an easy way to keep things straight. I'll add the square footage, if it has a basement, what year it was built, and then the same thing as what I just talked about. It's granite, it's kind of your standard level of granite, kind of builder grade, but nice. I would put high level, like granite, parentheses high, if it's one of those ones that has some beautiful streak running through it, or, you know, if you can just tell that it was kind of above and beyond. I added that it's dark wood cabinets. That's going to differ, like we talked about, from painted wood. Painted wood cabinets are going to be kind of a level above the dark wood ones. It does have a backsplash, all of those things that we just talked about. Then I'm going to work to find some comparable homes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into MLS. I typically will keep my subject property open on one tab. I'm going to go in to do a search. If you've done a short CMA, this is very familiar to you, but same type of vibe. We're going to go in, click residential. I'm then going to go in and put all active, all pending, and all closed. I typically will do the past 6 months if I feel it is comparable. My goal here is to keep things broad to see how many I can get. And then as I have more options available, I'm going to start to narrow things down and filter out this criteria to make it make sense for the story I want to tell. I just want to have as many options up front as possible, but keeping in mind that different markets are different markets. And so if I'm doing the search, I need to recognize that our November, December market is slightly different than it is now. Not dramatically so, but those numbers might tell a slightly different story. Obviously, if we were in a market kind of back during COVID and it was just at the beginning of things getting wild, that's a different market than things selling in 2 seconds. So just kind of keep those in mind. We've got a quick chat note. What if the property has never been added to MLS? Great question, Marta. I would say, I don't know what Brent's saying there. So if it's never been added to MLS, get the photos from the sellers. And then I would also go on to the Wake County tax site and see if you can get any information that way. It's not going to give you a ton, but it should tell you at least like the lot size. It'll tell you the general square footage. That's way off though. So get as much as you can, but just let your clients know, obviously I'm going in blind. This is the information I have based on what you've been able to provide to me. But I would say just start by getting photos from the sellers of each room as a point of reference, and ask them for any history on, you know, if they've had any updates to anything, if there's any improvements they've done, what are the ages of their systems, just kind of feel them out and use that as your point of reference. Of course. All right, so I'm going to go in 6 months back. This is a detached property. And then normally I'll go in and finish adding the fields, but I like to start by just getting a feel for how many are in the neighborhood. Offhand, in the past 6 months, if I don't add any criteria, there's 9 homes that have been sold in that neighborhood. That's a great starting point. So I can continue to hone things in. I'm going to take the square footage, and then you're going to buffer that on either side. Now, I'm moving a little fast through here, but just know this document that I talked about has at the start of it a general range of things that will provide guidance for what I'm doing on this MLS right now. So again, 6 months back, we're also going to be talking about the square footage. We like to try to keep it within a 10% range if possible. Just know you'll have to play with it, right? It's all about the number of comps that we get. So in this case, I might go down to about 1,600 square feet. And I might go up to about, I don't know, 23. I feel like once you get above 24, it's probably a slightly different house. It's built in 2020, so I'll probably start by putting 2017 as my base year. Now, when I'm looking at properties like this, thankfully, I'm only looking within the neighborhood, so most of them are completed. But if I was doing a radius search, if this is my minimum age, I very well could be having some options come up that are new construction. If that is the case, I want to go in and put no to new construction. Now, even if it seems that there are a good number of options within the neighborhood, I typically will go in and do a radius search. To do that, you're going to click on map. You're going to paste the address. Make sure anytime you're doing a map search, you put the city and the state, otherwise it will take you anywhere in the world. Make sure you press enter. If you do not press enter, it will use our office address as your base location. Once you've pressed return, you can then go in and put in a radius. I normally will just start by putting 1 and hit enter. Now, the reason I will do this, even if there are a good number of options in the neighborhood, is because people can spell things incorrectly. This neighborhood, for example, has 1 M, but I have seen a number of listing agents put it in with 2 M's because there's another neighborhood with the same name just spelled differently in Clayton. So that's why I'll do it that way. Just kind of keep that in mind. I'm going to start off and do a quick search. What do you know? This all looks great. Now, really and truly, normally I'm going to be using closed properties only because those, we really have a reference for how the numbers are going to speak to us. But having something in there that is pending can give a point of reference for what's currently happening in the market as well. So if I do put one in here that is pending, I might just add another and do 4 properties total. So we're going to start off and we're just going to do exactly what we did for the subject and just go through it. I start with the photos. Oh my gosh, what do you know? We're in our dream situation. I'm not gonna lie, I kind of picked this intentionally. It makes life easy. Most CMAs are not normally this easy, but when it's starting up, I think it's a nice point of reference so we don't get overwhelmed. So that said, it's going to make everything a lot more straightforward. We'll start on the outside, same exact front, except it's all vinyl. Same type of front porch. I'm going to make a note of that. In essence, I'm making a whole list of everything and how it compares to the subject property. In this case, I can't tell offhand, but it looks like this is a flatter lot. They've got LVP throughout the entire first floor as well. Their countertops and their cabinets are almost identical in terms of color and level of finish. It does look like they have a little maybe peel and stick backsplash back there, but in general, I'd put no backsplash for them. They've updated some lighting. Depending on the size of the home and how many updates of that sort they've done, I might make a note of that. In this case, I probably won't because my homeowner has also done a few slight lighting updates. There's no fireplace here as well. It does look like they added a few windows. I probably won't make any adjustments for that, but just something to note. They also have that porch covered on the back, the loft, their paint, their carpet look really good, very comparable. They have a tray ceiling in the owner's bedroom. I wouldn't really make an adjustment for that, but just something to note. Same exact layout, almost same exact finishes. Their backyard, yep, it's flat. It is also fully fenced. It does look like they have screened in this back porch. And they back up slightly to trees. I know this neighborhood well, so they do actually back up to houses, but they do have a little tree buffer there, and their backyard after their fence slopes slightly, so you can't really see the neighbors. It's kind of a nice situation. So I'm going to take all of that information, and put it into my spreadsheet. I'm going to start up at the top and put in the address. Let me just make sure I'm on the right one. Shane, yes, okay. So I'm then going to go in and put in all of that information. I put in vinyl only as opposed to vinyl with moderate stone. I've added the square footage. Now, anything that is the same along the right-hand side, I'm obviously putting 0. As I find differences though, I'm making slight adjustments accordingly. So in my opinion, and here's the thing I want us to keep in mind, there is no one way to do this. There is no right way. There is no wrong way. These are simply estimates that I'm making based on the finish level, where the home is located and the type of neighborhood that it's in terms of finishes, and just kind of making an estimate of what I feel each of these falls in. Now, when we're making these adjustments, we want to make sure that we are giving credit where credit is due, but we also want to make sure that we are adding or accounting for depreciation. So if I was selecting moderate stone in a new construction design appointment, for example, that might be a $1,500 selection, but it's not something that someone would pay $1,500 for resale in a used home. So in that case, I'm probably going to add about $500. In my opinion, it would take $500 to add that stone to the exterior. Then going to go on down, everything looks the same in terms of granite, the wood is the same, they don't have a backsplash. So I did add an adjustment for that, same type of thing. It's not crazy, but I just want to make sure that it's mentioned. The nice thing here is, keeping in mind a few things. One, there's always going to be adjustments in ways of these comparable homes might be nicer than your subject. And so there's going to be things that we're making adjustments based on that for. So where we can, we also want to make sure that we're kind of fluffing our sellers and giving them credit where credit is due for the selections that they have that are nicer than their neighbors, even if they're small ones. And then going to go on down. The other difference that I saw is that they had screened in their patio. Now, if we want to reference each of these things, now's a good time to kind of hop back over to the sheet that we talked about. When we're on here, the purpose of the CMA guide is to take past experience that we as agents here at Choice have had and past references we have had on appraisals for different adjustments and seeing how those yield per line item and giving us a point of reference to make our own adjustments accordingly. So the first page of this document just gives indications on how you want to start your CMA and the different benchmarks for your criteria. But then as we progress, it will show you exactly how to make these adjustments. So square footage, for instance, if there is a difference of more than 50 square feet in difference between your subject and your comparable, you will want to make some sort of adjustment. It is up to you to decide what you think that finished area is worth. Most of the time, I'll stick around the $40 a square foot range, unless it's more of a luxury home or it's in a different area. Same thing here, we have adjustments based on the number of half baths or full baths, garage bays, things of that sort. So when I was making a reference to figure out how I wanted to credit or subtract based on the comparable property having a screened-in porch and ours not, then I went back to this guide and I looked at screened deck and it says 3,500 and up. Well, in this case, this is an interior covered patio, so they really only screened 2 sides of it. So in my opinion, that's not really the same as like a fully screened in patio or deck. It's a little bit different. So I didn't make it quite as big of an adjustment. In this case, I did about $1,500. It is fully fenced, so no adjustment there. They don't have a deck. We do, but ours isn't like the nicest, so it wasn't a big adjustment. Their yard is flat and backs to trees. Again, I'm going to reference what is it back to. Here's information on adjustments to make based on the lot. So if it is a very sloped lot, that's about a 3% adjustment, or if it backs to a busy road. So when I did this adjustment, if I did 3% based on 370, that's a lot. It's not quite as much as I would think that it would need to be, or I mean, it's more than what I think we would need for that. It's $11,000. in my opinion, I don't know if ours is quite that bad since we are actually utilizing the space. So I went ahead and just put that because theirs is flat, we made an $8,000 subtraction. Then I'm going to take the price that it actually sold for. I'm also going to reference whether there were any financial concessions made at the time of closing. And I'm going to make note of the number of days on market. Now, when I was looking at this, I was very tempted to put 27, but I actually decided not to, because if we look at the price history for this home, we'll see that they had listed it and then they canceled it and they relisted it again for much lower. And actually the market spoke and they closed significantly higher. And so I just ended up using the 4 days because I want, keep in mind that we want these numbers to tell the story that it helps us convey to our sellers. And so in my mind, I'm using these 4 days because based on all of these adjustments, I think this will help make sense. I can always go in and change this at the end if needed. The nice thing about this spreadsheet is it is automatically formulated so that as you are putting this information in, it will then take the sales price and make all of the subtractions and additions over along the right-hand side. It will then take that number and give you an updated adjusted sales price, considering all of those adjustments. So this first one, considering those adjustments we made, would end up balancing out around the $362,000 mark. Perfect. I'm going to go back and do the same thing for the other two. What do you know? Same exact situation. I'm telling y'all, if this is your subject, you are in a good situation. But again, we're kind of easing our way on into it. It's the same layout. If we're starting at the front, again, it's all vinyl. Looks like a relatively flat front yard. When I look at this though, a few things to note. One, their cabinets are a little bit lighter than ours. And this is also laminate. It took me a minute to figure out if this was laminate or not. A few things kind of gave it away. One, I did a Command F. I searched for the comments and typed in granite. There's no granite listed. If they have granite, they'll normally put it in the comments somewhere. Additionally, you have kind of this rounded edge right at the end, and the top is nice and flat on the sides, although it's rounded on the edges. And this is a top mount sink. I went back and looked at the subject property, and if you can tell, it's inlaid. It's an inlaid sink if it was granite. So just food for thought. They also have LVP throughout the entire first floor. One thing I didn't know, I don't know if I would, but the other property did have a number of can lights. Ours has some can lights. That's getting kind of granular, but just food for thought. They screened their porch as well. It's really hard to tell what their lot is like. It looks like it is not fenced though. It's pretty flat and it does back to trees. You guessed it. I'm going to take all that information and put it in. Now, obviously, I'm going to put that this is pending. If it's pending, it doesn't give us the best representation of what it's going to be closed. But, you know, if it was only on the market for 3 days, well, it was 76 before, but 3 days, they're doing something right to get it done. So again, vinyl only. The thing that I like about putting everything on the same line, obviously we talk about exterior construction. If I just dumped everything exterior related, it can be confusing. I like this because then I can say, all right, these two are the same. I'm going to make sure that this is the same exact adjustment for each one. If it's the same finish, keeps things nice and equal. Again, they had laminate countertops. We have granite in ours. We're going to reference this. We are granite versus laminate, $2,000 to $5,000. I went ahead and put 4,000 for now, just because I feel like more and more now people, especially in a relatively new home, are going to expect granite. So I like that we have that. It's also a slightly lighter wood cabinet. Nothing wrong with that, but just knowing, again, if we went into a new construction builder situation, their design appointment, your lowest level of cabinet finish is going to be your light wood, then it's going to be dark wood, and then above and beyond that, you're gonna have your painted cabinets and then your white painted. Judy asked, is there any adjustment for granite versus quartz? I think it just really depends on the finish level. You know, if it's one of those ones where for either of them, you can tell kind of your, like, this one is kind of a basic granite finish. If you have that granite that just has a beautiful seam running through it, or it's some quartz that you can just tell is above and beyond, you can absolutely make that adjustment. It depends on the situation. Sometimes I'll keep them the same though. It looks like Brian just stepped away, so I'll be interested to hear his thoughts on that. But I would say it's just up to you to use your judgment. Brian, do you want to chime in real quick? Can you? Laminate, or excuse me, granite versus quartz.
Yeah, gosh, I mean, it's just such a wide variety. So I would just, you know, unless we're talking like a really high-end home, I don't know that I would go crazy on making an adjustment. I mean, is the buyer, so what we're trying to do is figure out what a buyer is likely to pay for a house. Is a buyer going to pay more because there were granite versus quartz? Maybe, I don't know. So I just wouldn't go crazy whatever you do. Now, if you're in a really high-end home and you know somebody spent, it was $50,000 countertops compared to builder grade countertops, like, yeah, you've got to start doing that, but probably you're not going to be comparing homes like that, right? If that was the case, then we probably don't have the right comparables. And yeah, Judy, you're right, quartz is higher end. But then my question would be, is all quartz higher end than cascading waterfall level 5 granite, right? Like, so just one thing I'll just say here is that you notice that Kate uses some subjective opinions here, and she kind of, because that's what you're doing in a CMA. Unfortunately, if it was as easy as pushing a button, then Zillow would be right, and so this is like using our experience. And no, I 100% recognize it's harder when you don't have that experience yet, but it's using our experience and our judgment to come up with what are people willing to pay. And what you'll find is we're coming up with a range here anyway. So if an adjustment is $1,000 different or $2,000 difference, it's not really going to matter in the big scheme of things. So that's all I'll say. Don't get too caught up on the nitty gritty of it.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point though, is obviously we're making all of this so that we can provide advice to our sellers. But really and truly, the verbiage here is what are buyers willing to pay for things in terms of given finishes. And so, yes, a given product might be X amount of money if they were to physically buy it as a seller and install it in their home, but it's not dollar for dollar in terms of what the buyers would pay. And obviously we know that, but I'm just kind of keeping that in mind.
Well, yeah, so, and just a great example of that is square footage difference, right? I mean, if homes are selling for $250 a square foot in the neighborhood, but you don't adjust $250 for every square foot difference, because a closet might be bigger. It might have a bay window that's, average bay window is 35 square feet, right? You're applying $250 per square foot to that. There's a huge adjustment for a bay window. Hallways could be a little bit wider. The breakfast nook might be a little bit bigger. So like the same kind of concept, right? Like, is there really any difference in value between a 2,000 square foot house that is the exact same floor plan as a 2,100 square foot house? There's just 100 square feet spread across 2 levels somewhere, so that's kind of the same concept, I think.
Yeah. And my thought process here, y'all, is we're going to go through all of these comps, and then I'm going to go back to that spreadsheet, because I will circle back, especially to that square footage remark, and kind of compare that with the bedroom count, because that's a common question we get. So just know I am going to circle back to that. Going on down, their paint condition, it was hard to tell from the photos, but just based on what I could tell, it looked like their paint wasn't completely fresh. Same thing, same adjustment for the screen and patio. Their yard was not fenced. Again, we have a reference for fenced yards. And also, you feel free to use your own personal experience. We try to update this based on the information we have, but if you just installed a fence and you know that that type of fence is X amount of money, just kind of make an adjustment based on your experiences. In this case, I put $2,500, just somewhere kind of in between. So all of that to say, considering the fact that it backs to trees, a nice flat yard, again, same adjustment. Then once it's all said and done, that adjusted price is $367. So we're pretty close, these two. Makes sense. Same neighborhood, same floor plan. I'm not surprised. All right, then we're gonna do one that's a little bit different, not dramatically. We're still in the same neighborhood, same street even, but different layout. So same type of thing. Let's start on the outside. It does have a slightly sloped yard in terms of the front. We'll take a look at the back in a second. It does have either brick or stone kind of around the base. In my opinion, that's similar enough to the one that we have. They've got an inlaid covered patio as well. It does look like they've got a slight slope to their lot. It's fully fenced. LVP throughout the first floor, dark cabinets, same level of granite. They've got carpet in the bedrooms, makes sense. They've got dual vanities, it's combined, but there's still 2 sinks, separate shower and tub. And then upstairs, they've got a loft and some additional bedrooms. One thing I didn't put in this one is that the owner suite is down. It's up to you whether you want to make an adjustment based on that. Now, in this case, again, I didn't have too many photos, so I did click on the map because I wanted to get a gauge for the backyard situation. This is on the same exact street. Our house is somewhere down here. So I know, because I'm familiar with this property, that every house on the street have kind of a sloped backyard. So I'm going to assume that theirs is sloped as well. I'm going to go in and I'm going to make those same adjustments. You guys get the point. I'm not going to go line by line, but the main thing I want to cover here is the difference with this property. The main adjustment I made was relating to square footage. To Brian's point, for the other two, I did not. They are slightly different in terms of square footage, and technically, yes, those are above 50 square feet in terms of difference. So according to that spreadsheet, it might seem like I should make that adjustment, but in my mind, this is the square footage that was provided by the builder. If we were to go back out, it might be a slightly different square footage. And to Brian's point, it kind of depends on who measures the house. Some people will measure that walk-in closet in the owner's bedroom. Some people might not. And so I don't want to get too in the weeds of things like that. But in this case, having a square footage difference that's like 280 square feet or something like that, that's notable enough for us to make an adjustment. So if I go in, take 220 or 2,266, subtract that from 1980, or subtract 1980 from that, yep, 286 square feet. Then I'm going to take that number, I'm going to multiply it. In this case, I'm going to start with 40 square feet, or $40 a square foot, and multiply that by 40. That's $11,440, which is what I put in here. 200 square feet doesn't sound like much, but that's a big adjustment. I guess in this case, it's closer to 300, but that's a big adjustment. So that's where we're going to see the majority of our compensation change here. And that really makes that closer to 350 in terms of list price. So what I would do in this situation is take that information and say, okay, well, that gives us a benchmark. Obviously, these two are the closest. It sounds like their pricing was slightly off from the start, though, which is why both of them relisted. Our market now is slightly different. So at a glance, I'm thinking we'll probably list between 350 and 370. I would probably say around like the 360 mark sounds good to me. But why don't we go ahead and add a few more comps to this? And so then I would go in and make some more adjustments. So let's just play with it a little bit. Let's say that we were going to go outside of the neighborhood slightly. Might just do 2 mile radius. Now that's pushing it a little bit, but humor me. As Bryn likes to say, make sure I delete that subdivision information. All right, now this is where we want to pay attention to are any of the subject or any comparable properties in neighborhoods that don't compare to ours? In this case, no, not really, but just know if we're looking at something like Preston or Lockmere, we really do want to be comparing homes within the neighborhood to other homes within the neighborhood. I'm not going to do a full version of these, but just kind of keeping things in mind. Same type of vibe as what we talked about, right? This is a much higher level of stone finish, so I would make an adjustment accordingly. Looks like it's a flat lot. I can't tell if it's fully fenced. Oh, yep, it sure is. Nice flat lot, fully fenced. At first, you're like, wow, looks like amazing finishes. LVP throughout, but they really just have some accent paint. Their cabinets are a little bit nicer because they're staggered, but they do have laminate countertops or solid surface. I would figure that out and make some adjustments. But the main thing here is making note of the square footage adjustment. Same type of thing. I'm gonna do the math real quick on it. 2,327 square feet minus 1980. That's 347. If I multiply that by 40, that's $13,000. And then we make an adjustment for the fence and exterior finish. 380 minus, let's just call it 15,000. I'm sure honestly it would be more than that. What do you know? We are at 365. So if we continue to do that for a number of the comparables, I would probably do that one. And then either, I don't know if I would do that one. That one seems a little bit low. I might would pick this one. They're both kind of in line with exactly what we've been doing and making those small adjustments. There's nothing that says you have to do every single adjustment for all of them. But if you're starting to feel like you're getting the picture of what the price is going to be, you just want to kind of confirm that, do something like this and kind of play around with those big adjustments and see if it yields the same price. We will then take that information, put it into our spreadsheet, print it out, and bring that one sheet with us. But then really and truly, we're just keeping that in our back pocket for the high C people, the people that really want to know the inner workings of how we got to that price. Likely we are going to use some report, or I might make something in Canva, like I'll talk about in our next class in terms of presenting the information. We'll just kind of put the photos in front of them and then we'll say, here's how we got there. So I'm going to start circling back to our guide. But before I do that, does anyone have any questions about what I just did on all of this, and how does this process compare to what you do?
Hi, Kate. I do have a question about, I was getting stuck on a couple of things as I was searching for comparable properties. One of them was just the ranges, the range for square feet and the range for the age, like the year. Could you cover that just one more time? Please?
Absolutely. I mean, it's very understandable. It never fails. Sometimes we'll have some amazing comps, and then occasionally you'll run into that situation where you just have nothing. So that said, I would adjust age probably more than I would adjust square footage. So I would do, like, if we're looking at a property that was built in 1980, I would start by doing one 1975 and 1985, and then go out another 5 years, then maybe another 5 years, but I would probably go further out in a radius before I would go too much further in square footage. I would go like a 500 buffer in terms of square footage on either side, but even that's a lot. Kind of above and beyond that, in my opinion, might be a different house. But I would start by the location, especially if you're in a rural area. Or where is the house located? Brian, you look like you're.
Let me just add in real quick. I mean, like what you said before, you start narrow and then expand. You expand as far as you have to with any of the criteria, right? But like, yeah, to compare a 2020 home to a 1980s home, I mean, you just want to avoid that at all costs, because it's really hard to make, like, to justify what kind of adjustments you're going to make. So I agree, go out further in radius if you have to, because you can find similar homes in areas that are similar price points, even if it's in a different zip code, if it had to be.
Okay.
Usually, yeah, I mean, in most of our markets, we're going to be, I mean, the calls, when Kate and I get a call about helping with a CMA, it's always a really oddball property. And I think there's like this discomfort with expanding your criteria, but we can't create new comps, like new sales. And so we have to work with what's in the MLS. And if you look at appraisals on really challenging properties, that's what they do too. And then they do commentary. The difference is we don't have to answer to a lender. An appraiser has to answer to a lender and explain and defend why they did what they did. We don't have to do that. So like, we're just trying to figure out what somebody's going to pay for it. So if you've got to go out 10 miles because you're selling a property in Bahama and there's no properties nearby, do it, right? Just know you've got to figure out how to account for these differences in the properties. And it's going to be some subjective thing. I wish this guide that we have to reference could tell you all that. It is really just the starting point, and then you just expand it out as you have to. And feel comfortable. Now, don't do it just for the sake of doing it, right? Don't bypass comps because you want the price to be higher or lower. Don't bypass good comps. But like, just like Kate's talking about, well, yeah, it's great if you've got 15 sales in Summerlin. Well, why would you leave there? But if you've only got 3 and one of them's kind of a stretch, why wouldn't you go into Camelot Village if it's a similar neighborhood? Like an appraiser would do that too. So
yeah, that makes sense, Ryan. I guess that was my fear too, is going out of the zip code. Kate actually helped me one time when my neighbor wanted to have a CMA done for his house, and his house is an oddball big time, and we just couldn't find anything that would be exactly even in the zip code, certainly not in the neighborhood, because it's nothing like anybody else's house. And so that was my question. Like, when you get one of those, you just like, where do you get the comps? But that makes more sense now that you said, hey, don't be afraid. If you can't find them, then go a little bit further down. So makes
Right.
sense.
I mean, look, I've listed homes where the neighborhood was split by the county line. And so then you've got to make adjustments for the neighbor's house. Literally, the neighbor is in Wake County and the one you're trying to comp is in Franklin County.
Wow.
Well, you've got to make an adjustment for that, right? And
Yeah.
so, which isn't easy. You just got to start playing. Then you just have to go back. Like, well, look, you can look 5 years ago at what were the differences in prices between the ones that sold in Franklin County and in Wake County, and figure out, well, what was the difference there? And you might be able to carry that kind of that math, that equation forward and use it today and say, well, look, the ones in Wake County generally sell for 10% more than the ones in Franklin County. And that's been the case for every year for the last 5 years. And so I can make that assumption now. I can do my comp and then add 10% if it's in Wake County, or subtract 10% if it's in Franklin County. So there's different ways we can start to do this. You've got to come up with some number here, and then you can come up with other data to help support it. I mean, I've seen, and I've done this myself before too, look at the tax value and look at the ratio between tax value and sales price. And you can come up with usually a fairly consistent ratio there. And then you can apply that ratio to give you a number, right? Because your house is going to have a tax value. You know that most of the houses are selling for 120% to 125% of tax value. You can apply that to your tax value and say, okay, well, how does that number compare to my CMA, right? And if it's in the ballpark, it gives you just more confidence with your number. So all of that to say, this is not a perfect science.
Right. That makes sense. Thank you.
I used to be afraid to go too far out in terms of my comps, and obviously the closer the better. But I will say I did get an appraisal back years ago, and the appraiser had gone out like 5 miles, and I didn't even think he needed to. It was one of those situations we ended up actually rebuttaling the appraisal because there were homes that were like in the neighborhood, But that said, if they can go that far out, then we certainly can if needed to.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions, you guys?
Well, let me just add in real quick. I actually had a call yesterday about a listing agent. First time I think she sold a listing, and she said, well, what should I do anything? And the appraiser's coming, should I do anything? Well, and we kind of talked through it. And one thing I didn't mention to her, I'm going to have to reach out to her, but when you have this kind of detailed analysis and all this data to support your pricing, you don't know that appraiser. I mean, a lot of these lenders use appraisal services where that appraiser could be coming from Wilmington or Fayetteville or Greensboro, and they may not know our market intimately. And so if you have this detailed analysis, you can provide it to them. If they're an out-of-town appraiser, they are not going to be mad at you. So this could actually help support your sale price down the road too, by having this kind of detailed analysis. And also, so I don't forget to mention it. Look, the reason why most agents don't do this, like the reason why you click CMA summary on TMLS and print that off instead, or you go to RPR and you can be done with this in 20 minutes, is because this takes a while, right? To sit down, it's going to take you an hour or 2 hours or more if it's really complicated, right, to get all this done. But then you, at the end of this, you have a number you're really comfortable with. And so that's why it's important to do it. And I think it's important to know, why do we often not want to do it? Because I'm guilty of it myself, where I've had past clients call me, I think I know the house. I'm like, oh yeah, I think your house will probably be 350. And then I'm trying to backtrack after I actually do the analysis, because I shot my mouth off too early with a price. Another perspective on what Kate said is, she says, send me the pictures. I got so anxious going on listing appointments because I knew that all they really wanted from me was the price. What is my commission and what are we going to sell the house for? And I'm like, how the heck am I going to, I don't know. I got to get in there and I'd panic and I would just say something and then I'd be wrong, right? And then I'm trying to undo the damage I've done. So I used to tell sellers, look, this first meeting is for us to talk about the process and see if we want to work together. After I've seen your house in person, I'm going to go back and do the analysis so that we can decide together on a list price. But that took the pressure off of me to have to come up with a number. Now I printed off comps. I had the CMA summary. I mean, I knew what had sold in the area because I didn't want to look like an idiot. But I always let them know ahead of time, I'm not giving you a number at our first meeting. I'm going to call you back and we're going to talk about that after we've decided to work together. And so that took some of the pressure off of me. So if that helps you, go with that too.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
So, yeah, and I mean, I think that's why we all do all of this too, is just knowing that like inevitably, if you make any representations about the finish of their home, it's not going to be what you think it is. And so it's a lot easier to have an idea of all of this walking into it, even if you end up holding your cards close. And it really helps you get to know the comparable homes around it. And so when you walk into that meeting and they're like, well, the house down the street sold for this amount, you're like, well, yeah, they did actually. And they have X, Y, and Z finishes. And so I think it just kind of helps with all of that. And the other thing, to your point, Brian, about the quick CMA summary, the reason we do all of this is because, to that exact point, your price per square foot, which is the most common information we look at when we're looking at that short version of a CMA, does not take into account, great question, word, and we're going to get to that in just a second, does not take into account all of those finishes. And so if we're looking at just the price per square foot, we could be really missing out on some detail that we really need to pay attention to. So we'll go through this real quick, and we will hit on the pool thing in just a second as well. So I just want to go through all of these real quick, because we recognize that we might not always be in the situation that is our dream scenario. And so occasionally, to Lena's point, we might be out a little bit. We might have a ranch style home and everything around us is 2-story, or we might have a ranch and all of our comps are split level if we're in kind of the downtown Cary area, whatever the case may be. So we do have adjustments for that in place. Another common question we get about CMAs is relating to walk-up attics and unfinished basements, or even finished basements. We'll have a situation where it's a beautiful home and it has a fully finished basement. Now, again, we're using our best judgment. Is this a walkout basement? Are there a ton of windows? Regardless, basements don't carry the same weight in terms of price per square foot as the rest of the home does. So just kind of reference all of that. Brian, will you add your thoughts on that? Okay.
Yeah,
Ahead of you.
I'll try to chime in. I'll try not to interrupt you, but I'll chime in anytime I want to mention something else.
Yeah.
Just as a background too, for everybody on the call that doesn't know, so I got my appraiser's license years ago just for fun, right? It's why I'm the idiot that wants to be the broker in charge, because I just like this kind of stuff. But so when it comes to like basements, I mean, there are some appraisers. Years ago, the appraisal board said basements and finished walk-ups are not the same. You've got to make a you can't count those as the same. Well, then a few years back, they kind of said, well, we're going to like come off that a little bit. We're not going to be so, say that's our strict policy, because if a basement is finished just to the same degree as the rest of the house, man, why couldn't it be worth the same as the rest of the house? That being said, you are walking underground when you go into a basement to some degree. And so it probably makes sense that square footage isn't worth the same as the main level on the second floor. So it can vary widely, to Kate's point. What I like to do is remove the basement completely, pretend it doesn't exist, and then compare the rest of the house. So if you've got 3,000 square feet above grade, do a CMA as though that basement doesn't exist. Compare it to other 3,000 square foot houses. Now, unless you can find lots of comps that have the basement, well, then that's fine. But often where we struggle is we can't find good basement comps. And so do the house without it, and then apply some value to what that basement is worth. Again, it's going to be subjective. I get it. Start with 50% of what the finished square foot price per square foot is, go from there. Does it have 4 bathrooms down there? Well, that's different than a basement that has 1 bathroom. Does it have a theater, right? So like that's where, the square footage has some value, but then the features of the square footage have value. So you're just going to come up with what you think that's worth and add that then on top of what your adjusted value is. I think that's a good approach as we're looking at basements when we don't have other good comps. Now, if you're in, I don't know, what's a neighborhood that has lots of basements? I mean, if you're in, like Governor's Club or something in a really hilly area where there could be lots of basements, great. If you can just do direct comps to houses with basements, that's even better. And then the other thing I'll mention is like with unfinished basement or walk up, this is where it's helpful to talk to builders and figure out, well, what are builders charging, right? If you're looking at a floor plan, a Lennar house that has an option for an unfinished 3rd floor, what do they charge, like a walk-up? What do they charge for that? Is that $30,000 to get 1,000 square feet of unfinished space up there? you know, if so, kind of use that, right? So you could even call builders in the area and ask, like, hey, do you guys have an optional third floor walk up? What does that cost if you add it to a floor plan? And that can help give you an idea too. All right, I'll be quiet for now.
You're good. One thing I was trying to figure out if we should throw it in here, but I think I will. So in terms of square footage, we've been talking a lot about that. One of the things that you'll notice down in the miscellaneous section is the number of bedrooms, and it says typically no adjustment unless there is a functional difference. So for example, my townhome is 2 bedrooms. It really and truly, I would only compare it to 2-bedroom townhomes if I could help it. But 3 and above are kind of the same in terms of functionality. It doesn't dramatically change the buyer pool. It doesn't dramatically change the functionality of the home. And so once we get kind of that 3 and above situation, we really want to be making those adjustments on a square footage basis. And so that's why, as I'm going through this, I didn't pay any attention really or spend any time talking about the number of bedrooms they had. Now, granted, they were all 3 bedrooms, so it didn't matter so much. But if I had a 3-bedroom and a 5-bedroom, I'm not really going to make an adjustment based on that. I'm going to make an adjustment based on the square footage. And circling back to the conversation Brian had earlier in this call is you don't really feel the square footage. The reason we say that is you don't really feel the square footage changes in that regard. It's more so the livability of the home as a whole. And so if we're already taking into account some sort of adjustment to a comparable based on the square footage, it would kind of be layering it on top of one another if we also made an adjustment for the number of bedrooms. And so if we've already accounted for it in square footage, that's kind of already taken care of. And to Brian's point, we might see that change in, you know, what is the difference between a 4-bedroom where the rooms are smaller and a 3-bedroom where all of the bedrooms are just sizably larger? Does that really change much? And does that change what a buyer would pay for it? Probably not. It might change, you know, where they have their home office, if it's in a bedroom on its own or if it's included in a guest bedroom, right? But like other than that, it doesn't change too much. So that's kind of why we say all of that. Brian, I know you do a much better job of putting that eloquently though.
No, that's perfect. I was just going to give a real life example. I used to own rental property in a neighborhood called Falcon Ridge over by NC State, their townhomes. And so we had 2-bedroom townhomes and 3-bedroom townhomes there. Our 2-bedroom, even though it was the same, almost the same square footage as one of our 3 bedrooms, the price was different, right? Because these are primarily investment properties. And so a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom rather is worth more than a 2-bedroom because we're getting more in rent. And so that's where, like, you can, in a situation like that, you've got to, I mean, you don't want to compare that 2-bedroom to a 3-bedroom. They're very different properties, but yep, like Kate said, a 3 to 4, no big deal. I mean, if you're comparing a 3 to a 6 or 7-bedroom house, I don't know, like you've probably found the wrong comp at that point. But don't make an adjustment for a 3-bedroom versus a 4-bedroom.
Perfect.
And then I just saw a question come in, something about effective age. How do you calculate depreciation and figure out effective age? Well, there is, if you look at the tax record, there is an effective age. If you look at the buildings tab. So obviously, I mean, this is more relevant. Can you go to, type in 3912 Quail Hollow Drive. So it's gonna be more HOL, hollow, not hello. Sorry. This is gonna be more relevant on older homes. And then go to the buildings tab on that. All right, so this house was built in 1968, but then you can see an effective year of 1985 and a remodel year of 2015. And so this is where, you know, if you're only comparing it to homes built in 1968, like you could be missing potentially a comparable home because everything has been, nothing in the home is from 1968, you know? And so this is where you can find effective age. Again, don't lose sleep on this because if I'm doing comps for this house, if I was gonna list this house, most of the houses in the neighborhood were built in the mid 60s to mid 70s. So I'm gonna find comps. I'm not gonna have to worry too much about that. But the point is that if I needed to, like I can look at a much newer home to compare this to if I needed to, because the effective age is more like 1985 versus 1968. So I don't want to go down too much a trail on that because I don't have a great answer for you. I wouldn't worry about depreciation so much. Just you and your accountant worry about that. Don't worry about that for the CMA. Now appreciation we might account for. Because again, if we're looking at a comp from a year ago and the market has gone up 10%, you might just add 10% to your adjusted value for that comp.
Going back to Marta, obviously we have a ton of information. I feel like the bathroom and garage information is pretty straightforward. Use your best judgment on what you think kind of makes sense per situation. When we're talking about the pools though, I mean, as with everything, it's all subjective. It's whatever you're kind of thinking, keeping in mind that it's kind of a balance when it comes to pool. They are incredibly nice. They can be beautiful. It can limit your buyer pool just because it's something that someone then has to maintain. And is it something that they're interested in? Do they have small children? And is that something they worry about keeping an eye on, whatever the case may be? Kind of unrelated, but just food for thought. So I think sometimes people will get some like $50,000 pool and they're like, well, this increases my value at least $50,000. As with everything, we already know that's not necessarily the case, but kind of a friendly reminder, that's why. But when we're looking at pools, I would say, $20,000 is kind of the high end for things, maybe 25. So I had a property that closed in the middle of last year, and I normally would pull it up, but they actually removed all but 3 photos, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. It's not helpful. So if you're a listing agent, please don't do that. It just really helps us with comps down the road. But it was one of those situations where they had just kind of your standard in-ground pool. It was nicely finished, but it was just concrete on the outside. There weren't any water features. There wasn't tile around it, nothing like that. When that home was appraised, none of the homes around it had a pool. And the adjustment that he made for that was $10,000. So that's just kind of a nice benchmark to know about, just kind of your standard rectangular pool that you can get in, that's built in. Now, if I'm going to one of the properties, kind of up near North Raleigh, kind of north of our office a little bit, I had a listing appointment with some people a while ago, and they have a beautiful pool in their backyard. Like it is, Terraria tile around it. They might even have a little fireplace out in the back. It's got kind of a brick patio, fence around it, like really, really nice. And each of those things are going to be their own adjustment. But the pool itself in that situation, I would say it's about 20 to 25,000. And so I think just kind of use, as with everything, use your best estimate based on the finish level. And just know that 6 months ago or so, when I had that other one, it was about 10,000 for the one that wasn't as nice.
Yeah, and I'll just add in that, COVID has an impact on this pool adjustment because pre-COVID, pools were a detriment. And then all of a sudden, overnight, that changed, and having a pool made your house more valuable. So, just take that into account. If you can find comps with pools, great, do that. I would say don't sacrifice the house being similar when you're deciding on your comps just because it happens to have a pool. It'll be easier to just make an adjustment for the pool than for making adjustments on a house that's not really similar. So yeah, for whatever that's worth. And while I'm looking at this list, I realized I need to update it with solar panels. Solar panels will cost you $50,000-$60,000 to install. We may have seen more of an adjustment. I think the highest adjustment I may have seen is 10,000. Somebody may have told me they saw a $15,000 or $20,000 adjustment from an appraiser. But so the adjustments we've seen internally have been anywhere between 0 and 10, maybe a little bit higher, maybe up to 20 on solar panels. So it's another one of those where you spend $60,000 to install them. By the way, if you're offering advice to anybody, any ethical solar panel installer or salesman should ask the question, do you plan to sell your house anytime soon? Because anybody with a conscience would tell you it is not a good investment if you plan to sell your house soon. If you plan to stay there, a totally different conversation. So anyway, just know that that's in line with a pool, right? Doesn't matter how much you spend on it, and you're not going to get that back.
And I'm not going to go through all of these because you guys can read, but just kind of the main thing to keep in mind is get familiar with this, and please, please, please make a habit of looking at your appraisals, if for no other reason than just to get familiar with the adjustments that are being made for different topics. And because we pride ourselves on being resources to our clients, and the conversations that we have that are of value are not always the ones that are happening when people are immediately ready to go in terms of buying or selling. A lot of times this can be a past client or a friend or a family member that's asking for advice when they are looking to make an improvement to their home. And so the more educated we can be on this, the more helpful we'll be. And so, just getting familiar with things like this, I know it seems silly, but landscaping and hardscaping, that can be incredibly expensive. Landscape work is so costly. very rarely is it going to be under $5,000 if you're really putting in the work, but that's $0 to $5,000 is not really an adjustment. So those people that are really proud of their yards are kind of in for a rude awakening when they go to sell, if that's kind of what they're basing everything on. Obviously curb appeal is amazing, but just kind of get familiar with these types of topics so you can speak in an educated way. You guys get the point in terms of siding, nothing really to note there. Now, this is where it can get a little bit tricky, because the lot adjustments are things that are incredibly common, and it really does play a role if we're talking about meeting with a builder. The lot that's on that is kind of in the middle and backs up to a neighbor and doesn't have a fence is going to be your cheapest lot option. And then your corner lot is going to be your next lowest. And then going up, it's going to be the ones that back to trees or have a nice natural area behind it, whatever the case may be. But it's difficult to make these adjustments because they are percentages. But don't be intimidated. Literally, you are just taking the closed price of the comparable home and just multiplying it by, 0.97 or whatever the case may be. You're just making those adjustments. So just get kind of familiar with it. Again, my parents have a house in Cary that is in an ideal location, but their driveway is really sloped. The only time they can sell that house that no one is going to care about that, it was COVID, and they weren't going to sell that, so just making note that these are the types of things that can make a dramatic difference. Same type of thing of just having this in your back pocket of when you're walking up to your listing appointment, making sure that you make note of certain things that you want to circle back to so that you can casually set expectations in a kind way, right? If I'm walking up and I'm going through the home and we're talking about all of these things, towards the end of it, I'll be talking about what they can do to get their home ready. And I'm going to be mentioning things that buyers might come with feedback on. Your driveway is going to be one of the main hesitations. Are you gonna go ahead, Brian?
Yeah. Another thing with the reason why some of these adjustments, you could look at this and say, oh, well, a cul-de-sac is probably worth more than $2,500 to some people. Well, some of this will come out in the wash. I mean, if you're able to compare it to another home in a cul-de-sac, and let's say that house ends up being your highest comp, well, give more weight to that one, right? I mean, the more similar the house is, give more weight to those comps. One of the things, thank you for bringing this up. So like, one of the ways to do this is just simply take a range. Like when you look at this sheet and you say, okay, well, the price should be somewhere between 350 and 367, right? Or 350 and 370. That should be our range. Now we're going to pick where we want to be in the range based on the seller's motivation. But another way to do it is to say, well, look, this 367 comp is actually like the same floor plan. It's in the same cul-de-sac. Like this is the best comp. Well, we might say, okay, well, we're going to multiply that by 0.5 and then multiply each of the other ones by 0.25. And then that number that we come up with is is a recommended price, because that's weighting, doing a weighted average here. So, the point is that this is why you don't want to make too crazy of adjustments, because some of these things you're adjusting for are going to be reflected in the similar property sale price anyway. And so you could really overvalue a house if you're making adjustments to comps that are already priced highly because they had some of the same benefits.
Yep, absolutely. All right, miscellaneous items. The only thing I want to kind of note here in terms of details is when we're looking at comparable homes, just remember that obviously on the MLS, it might not necessarily say the age of given items. What I will do occasionally, depending on how invested I am, how much I know about the property, how serious the situation is in terms of gathering these numbers, you can also look up those comparable homes to see if there's any documents listed and find their property disclosure and see if that will list the age of either their roof or HVAC. And then if you don't see it and you really want to find out, then just taking that address for the comparable and searching for it in MLS and going back a listing or two to see if you can find that same document there. I think that's about it. Just kind of keep in mind again that there's no right or wrong way. I like doing things on paper. Brian and I will talk about it as well. It's kind of nice to just jot everything down, print it off, and just kind of do a brain dump. It's nice to bring that with you so that your people can see like, no, I really worked on this. But when we do it on the computer, the nice part is we can kind of play around with it and see how those numbers line up. And then if we realize that these adjustments are just too crazy considering what we're seeing, then we can change this and say, maybe we'll make an adjustment for $35 a square foot instead of 40, or whatever the case may be, and just kind of make it across the board in a way that makes sense to you. And then, like I said, just, the other thing to recognize, shout out to Mary Lou, is we always need to figure out what the communication style is of our clients. If they are high I type of people and they just want to know how we're marketing their home and they want to see the photos of the other properties, have this in your back pocket to reference by all means, but we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. But if you're talking to the client that's an engineer or a financial advisor and they want to know how we came to this number, you need to really spend some time making sure that you feel confident explaining this stuff, but also being open to some changes. Or, the other thing is you can always call list agents for things that have closed and just say, hey, I'm having a hard time comping this property. Would you just mind sharing a few details with me? Like, do you know what did yours appraise or did it not? Is there any chance you would be open to sharing what comps you used for the home or what comps your appraiser used? Don't hesitate to kind of reach out for being a resource to other people. And to that point, like I was talking about, I haven't seen it too often, but occasionally I will see situations where listing agents will take down the photos for a given property after it closes just for privacy's sake, which I totally understand. But obviously those photos in MLS is what we use to reference in terms of figuring out how comparable homes compare to the subject. So that's kind of all I have for you guys. My thought would be, obviously it's a lot. It seems really obvious, especially when you've got these ideal situations where we're comparing the same exact floor plan. That's hardly ever the case. So just know that, be at peace knowing it, knowing that we can't make up comps. We can only use the criteria that we have. And so if you can't find it, it's not because you're doing something wrong. It just might not exist. And so we need to continue to alter that criteria until it does. And so just take that and just do a few practices. Do one for your own property, do one for a family member, just get used to having that conversation. And just know that it might always be a little stressful, and that is okay. I will say the other thing, just in terms of workflow, do it however works for you. But I am always of the mindset that if I can sit down and do all of this at once, it makes my life a lot easier, because it's a lot harder to reference back in the spreadsheet and be like, okay, well, I'm going to do one comp now and then I'll do the rest later. And you don't really remember what credits you were giving to different things in a way that makes sense. So I would just do it that way. All right, you guys, any questions, comments? I would love to hear how this compares to what you guys have done. If anyone wants to share, maybe Judy, do you have experience doing long form CMAs? Anyone else want to chime in?
I'll chime in. I just one quick thing, because it was at the very bottom, so I don't know if everybody caught it. The automated valuation models and what role those play in this, which is to make sure that you look at those. Your sellers are going to have looked at them. There are 100 of them out there, but be aware of, like, what does it say on Zillow? What does it say on Realtor.com? RPR has their own. So see some of these, because it's either going to support the number that you have come up with on your CMA, or it's not. And if it's not supportive of that, then it's going to be an objection you've got to overcome at the listing appointment when you're talking about price. So you want to be prepared for that up front. The other thing is, look, for those of you that have been in the business a little while, it was very easy to shoot Zillow down and its estimates down years ago, right? The algorithm was so bad. It was new, it was unique, but it was so bad. It's getting better. No question about that. And it will continue to get better, because the technology is getting to the point where it can look at the pictures and make these adjustments, and it sees a heck of a lot more data than we do. And so, if it can be helpful, if your CMA says 550 and Zillow says 375, right? There's a red flag there. So look at it. Don't get too concerned if they're not the same thing by any stretch, but at least let it be a litmus test to, am I in the ballpark? Did I completely goof up? So don't be afraid to look at those, and don't treat them like a pariah, and you can't, like they don't have a place here. So
cool. All right, you guys. Well, thanks for hopping on. I appreciate you. On Thursday, we're going to be talking about listing presentations. So I'm going to take this information and talk about how I present it in a way that is appealing to the sellers, in a way that will keep them engaged. I know we all know that listing presentations are really just conversations in essence, but it is always nice, just as it is with buyer consultations. It's nice to have kind of a formal plan on how you operate with them, just so that we can always make sure we're touching on the appropriate information and guiding all of our clients accordingly. So thank you guys so much for hopping on today. I really appreciate you. Feel free to stay on if you have any specific questions that you want answered, but otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Kate.
Kate.
Of course. Thanks, y'all.
You'll have a happy Valentine.
Oh, likewise.
Thank